Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, and Geoff Mosher is in the house today. Don't forget, Friday, August 9th, Eagles are back on the radio against the Ravens, and they're working their way towards that starting today, Geoff Mosher, where the Eagles were on the field at training camp. Yes, there were actual practice happening. The players are back, and football is back, and so is Geoff Mosher. What's up, buddy?
How you doing, Mike? What's going on?
All is well, man. It's good to have football back. It's good to hear everything happening up there. The battle's already starting. We've already got a guy battling the elements out there. Looked like Mekhi Becton couldn't hold his lunch in today.
Well, that has happened before. It is not uncommon. Now, it's pretty humid out there. It's not as hot and humid as it can be in August, but I have never in my life, Mike, weighed 360 pounds. So I'm not going to comment on what it's like to be north of 340 or 350 and have to practice in heat and / humidity. Just know it was obviously a rough go there from a guy on the first day.
Right, and he was out at left guard because of a kind of a minor injury, I guess, to Landon Dickerson. But, you know, you're one of the first guys that I heard anyway talking about Becton being a possibility at guard. The fact that he plugged into the left guard spot, do you think he's a factor at right guard, or do they look at him as kind of a swing guy?
Well, I tell you, I mean, as I reported that day they signed him, yes, they want to take a look at him at guard to see what they've got there, because obviously the guy that they're trying to have win the job, Tyler Steen, has never really started there before outside of one game last year. So, you know, just like with Cam Jurgens last year, a lot of it is a projection, and you hope that the acclimation process is good and that he's ready, but you want to have good depth. You want to have backups. You want to have someone who, like Steph Wisniewski so many years ago, right, could step in and claim that job if the starter isn't ready to go, or in that case, Isaac Seumalo he just wasn't, from a confidence standpoint, ready in 2017. So Becton, I think, Mike, I don't want to say they're getting fortunate, right, but they obviously were able to get Becton in at left guard and right guard at OTAs because some guys weren't there or things were going on. So this minor injury to Landon Dickerson gives them another chance to evaluate Becton with the first team.
Right. He was in at left guard with the first team there, and obviously he's a guy Becton has never played guard, at least at the professional level, right?
As far as I know, he has never played guard. You don't see a lot of 6'7",
right? He's a big dude,
pound guards. Yeah.
As far as the offensive side of the ball, let's stick over there. You got Paris Campbell, who apparently had a pretty good day today. Is there a wide gap for that third spot? Is he clearly the leader in the clubhouse?
Well, you know, Josh and I had some fun on Monday, Mike, when you weren't in, on just sort of handicapping certain odds. Like, what would you put? You know, Adam and I on the last podcast, we talked about starting linebackers. Zach Bond seems like a dark horse, even though we put him at like plus 225 to start. Devin White minus 20. I think when you're looking at number 3 wide receiver, you almost want to do the Paris Campbell versus the field, but the field might have to include signing that is yet to happen. Paris Campbell's getting the first shot. He's not a natural slot receiver. He's played it before. He was with Indianapolis, but that's not really the spot. I mean, he's a speed receiver. He's a Z outside move receiver. But hey, like you just said, he's got the experience compared to the rest. So they're giving him that shot. But I think that this is one of those things where, and I think Nick Sirianni and Howie Roseman acknowledges they've got their eyes on that position. And if they've got to make a move, they will.
Yeah, and I think on the offensive side of the ball, when you're looking at stuff, it's the right guard spot, it's that third spot there, and then it's how they're going to use Saquon Barkley. And I don't know that we got a lot of look at that yet, but a lot of conversation this week about whose offense, who's calling the plays. No, it's Kellen Moore's offense. He's things here. I don't know that we see anything different day one, but do you think this offense will have a different look and feel to it this season?
Oh, Mike, it has to. It needs to. I mean, you don't bring in an offensive coordinator from a different ideological background, go from West Coast offense to spread offense, go from no motion to a guy who's familiar with motion, to go with a lot of 2x2 route concepts, 3x1 concepts, to a guy who has brought bunch formation, trip formations. You don't do that if you don't expect your offense to have a different look. I mean, That was the whole point. If it wasn't, then they would have just told Nick Sirianni, take your offense and freshen it up a little bit, tidy it up a little bit so you're not predictable. They didn't do that. Instead, they said, nope, we're getting a new offensive coordinator with completely new schemes and ideas. Now, again, offense is offense, right? There's a X receiver, there's a Y receiver, a Z receiver, there's 5 offensive linemen, you got a tight end. So I'm not trying to make it sound like West Coast offense or like the difference between speaking German and speaking Japanese. That's not the case, but you're obviously got an entirely new offense. So it should and needs to look different.
The opening question for Nick Sirianni today was that the relationship with Hurts is a work in progress. And then, Hurts has an opening statement basically that he wants to address the relationship here. Where do you think they are entering year number 4?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I always think that sometimes
whose question's a good one? The Sirianni's.
Yeah, but more so yours. Yours is a good question because I don't think, no matter what is said, I think we've all been in this game long enough to know that just because something is said behind a microphone doesn't mean it's gospel, right? I tend to think that sometimes reports get blown out of proportion, especially in the downtime, and maybe that's the case with this. I don't think these guys are arch enemies. I don't think they dislike each other at all. I do think they like each other. I do believe that there is mutual respect. I don't know that it's like I'm trying to think of a good, comparison, like a Bill Walsh, Joe Montana thing, but even they butted heads at times. So I think it's where it needs to be. There's respect. There's a good room. There's a coach that is considered a player's coach who takes the advice of his players. So I'm not really worried as much about the relationship between them as much as I am, more curious about how different coaches now between Sirianni and Patullo, Nussmeier and Kellen Moore, and then Jalen Hurts being caught in the middle. I'm just worried, more concerned about that. How does that operation go?
Geoff, from the Inside the Birds podcast. All right, so I don't know what your assertion is of the report about the coordinators. Diana Rossini confirming that Howie hires the coordinators. Does it matter? There's been a lot of back and forth on that. Howie talked about it today. He said, no, he brings me the list. So he's trying to make it like it's a collaboration here. What say you about this whole, how they got to these coordinators? And does it matter?
I don't think it matters much unless it's being forced upon, and I don't think that's the case. I never got the sense that was the case. They did talk to a lot of different leaders, right, and went to Kellen Moore. We always talk about how they cast a wide net, and it's been my experience that there are times with different head coaches where Howie did have to play a bigger role because certain head coaches didn't know the landscape as well, and so Howie had to bring guys in, but no matter who gets brought in, they talk to Howie, they talk to Nick, they talk to other people in the organization. So it is never a case where Howie brings a guy in, interviews him, and says, hey, I just interviewed this guy. I like him. Here's your offensive coordinator. Here's your defensive coordinator. Yeah. I know people roll their eyes when they hear collaborative process, and sometimes but there's no surprise like, this is your guy, whether you like it or not. That's never been, to me, that it's been like that.
Well, and I guess in Diana Rossini, the analyst, if you will, he said that's not normal, that the GM would have a hand. We see during Hard Knocks in the Giants here, Brian Daboll goes to Joe Shane and says, I'm going to make an offer to the coordinator. It didn't seem like there was much pushback there. That's your guy. Go make the offer.
Right. Well, I mean, look, we've had this conversation before. The Eagles are not normal. They do things differently, and not a lot of teams have a GM in place who has as much power as Howie Roseman. So a lot of their things that they do are going to be seen as abnormal. Like we can go back and talk about stories of Jeffrey Lurie kind of giving his opinion on a draft pick. And some might say that that's not normal, but that's how it's worked in the Eagle. You saw just this past draft, right? Jeffrey sitting at the laptop talking to Howie about trading up and trading down. You can see some war rooms where you don't even see the owner within 5 feet of the GM. So, yeah, the Eagles do things differently.
What'd you think of Roseman's answer today when he was asked about if he's paying attention to Hard Knocks?
I was surprised that he was asked that question in that manner. Like, listen, I'm not trying to rip a reporter. If you really wanted to know what he felt, though, you would say, how did you feel about the Giants being on hard? Or how did you feel about conversations with, say, one of your players now being broadcast? So he kind of left the door open for Howie to not really make a comment about it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't surprise me at all that Howie was not going to comment about it.
I like it. He says, the Giants are on Hard Knocks. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah. And by the way, that's the way it should be. You really shouldn't comment on another team's TV, happenings.
Cooper DeJean injury. How impactful is that in your mind? He's going to miss 3 weeks of camp here. I mean, you might say, okay, he's ready for the season, but missing 3 weeks for a rookie who really doesn't have a defined role, we think, yet.
Yeah, and I think that's tough. At the end of the day, they'll wind up he'll play, when he's healthy, and they'll figure out a way to get him on the field. But it does open up some opportunities for a guy like nickelback spot or compete for the nickelback spot with Avonte Maddox, right? Eli Ricks, another guy who now has inside-outside versatility because he added that to his arsenal last year, playing the slot. So to me, it opens up the door for those guys to get more time, get more reps, and give the coaches a little bit more evaluation of players who you aren't certain are going to make the roster compared to Gene, who is going to be on the team.
Right, yeah. It's just you wonder now, does that set him back from a bigger role than maybe he would have had week one?
Yeah, it's very possible. And, maybe that makes them, and look, we got 5-6 weeks here, right? Maybe it makes them look at Avonte Maddox and his experience and say, we're going to need that now more because Cooper's not going to be ready right off the bat. I don't know. I've also seen guys, like even young players, rookies, tear it up in that latter part of training camp, even if they missed a little bit, to the point where team felt really comfortable with them.
A lot of secondary questions entering camp. Today, get the first day. We see Quinyon Mitchell basically playing all three different roles there. We saw Maddox play some safety. We also saw James Bradberry only play safety today. He was running with the second team there. Any messaging for Bradberry that your second team safety, you're a long shot, buddy?
Yeah, I think you just said it. Yeah. Although you could argue being a second team safety on the Eagles means you're very close to being a starting safety given how thin they are, but they're not paying him. If you already are under the obvious impression that they're not paying James Bradberry all that money to be a number 3 corner, well, then they're also not paying him all that money to be a 3 or a 4 safety. So I'm going to stick with my prediction here that by the end of training camp, by the first week of the season, he's going to be with a different team. And it's probably going to be one of those trades where you get a 6 conditional 5, 5 conditional 4 if the guy plays a lot. But that's where I see this going.
It's funny because I mentioned this the other day, but it's so perplexing to me that is Vic Fangio signing off on, hey, I want you to play safety? I mean, are you not surprised that Fangio doesn't want to at least look at him playing in that corner spot? You seem like you're not surprised.
I mean, Vic Fangio can watch film like the rest of us, Mike. Vic Fangio's been in the game long enough to know 2 things. 1, he can watch the film and see for himself. And 2, that there is a business part of this game. You have a number 1, a first-round draft pick at that position with great athleticism, and that guy's got to get on the field. And you have a old cornerback who's coming off the worst year of his career. I mean, Vic is not going to – I can't imagine Vic's going to sit there and pound the table to have James Bradberry move back to corner after watching last year's film and knowing that he's got Quinyon Mitchell, Keely Ringo, Eli Ricks, Cooper DeJean. I mean, the guy knows he's got younger, more athletic players who he has to coach up and his staff has to coach up.
Yeah, I guess from that perspective, but you also signed Bradberry because you thought he was good enough to get that contract, so now you're kind of stuck with it. You would think, hey, we gave this guy a lot of money because we thought he was pretty good. Maybe try him to see if he fits your scheme better than he did last year.
I mean, I don't think it's a scheme fit, Mike. They do a lot of things. They did a lot of things in Sean Desai's defense. I'm sorry, that was similar to Vic Fangio's, right? I mean, no matter what we saw last year, it doesn't take away from the fact that the Eagles were one of the slowest, least dynamic, least instinctive, least athletic cornerback / safety groups in the NFL, and putting James Bradberry back at cornerback with 33-year-old Darius Slay on the other side.
Yeah.
I can't imagine Vic Fangio is saying, oh, I'd much rather have the experience than the dynamic athletic ability in today's day and age.
Geoff Mosher, Football at 4 from the Inside the Birds podcast. A lot to discuss as the Eagles are back at camp. Over-under I saw for Bryce Huff, 6.5 sacks. If that's the number, is it disappointing?
If he gets 6.5 sacks?
If he's 6.5, somewhere around there.
I don't like to be caught up just on sacks. I mean, if he had 24 quarterback hits and a bunch of hurries, but for the spirit of your question, yeah, that's a little low for the expectations.
Well, I would say, the Eagles go out and target him. He had 10 sacks last year. You let Hassan Reddick go. You're thinking you're going to get a guy who's going to get you, in that range, I would guess. And very interesting to see what happens with Nolan Smith, what kind of role he has. Brandon Graham did confirm, as we all thought, that this is going to be his last year. McMullen brought up an interesting point earlier today. Brandon Graham in his last year, knowing that it's his last year, do you play him more knowing that he's not playing again anymore? Just empty the tank, or does he just have a minimal role on this team?
Well, I mean, I think I would ask that question in reverse. If you take a 35-year-old player, defensive end, and start playing him 60% of the snaps or 50 or whatever in September, what are you getting out of him by the time you're in November and December, right? If his tank is that close to empty, why are you trying to empty it by October? If anything, you want to have him fresher for the end of the year. So I would imagine his role is similar to the way it was last year. You want to see him see it through to the Super Bowl because that's your expectations.
All right, Jeff, there's so much happening out there. Cooper DeJean, the injury there. The other guy was Sidney Brown, placed on the physically unable to perform list. But any expectations for Sidney Brown for you this year?
Oh, yeah, certainly, Mike. I mean, he's not coming back from an amputated leg. I mean, it's an ACL. I mean, I figured he was going to start. I think Rodney McLeod did this a couple of years ago, right? And there's a chance if he, winds up looking good that he might get activated. I think he can get activated off PUP before the end of camp. There's always the NFI rules and PUP rules. I'm pretty sure he can. So we'll see. I know there's that rule, like if you're still on it as you go into the season, then you got to miss a certain amount of time. But I would think if his progress is good and they want to see him in that third preseason game, that you might see him active before that. So we'll see.
Isaiah Rodgers was across from Darius Slay today. Will he be the guy across from him in Brazil?
Well, let's have some fun with this. If I were a handicapper, Mike, I'd probably put Quinyon Mitchell at a -150, and then I'd make Isaiah Rodgers I'd still put him in the plus, right? Probably plus 150. Okay. Is that fair?
So you think Mitchell and Slay will be the two that open the season in Brazil?
I think so. Now that's just sort of projecting. Obviously, what Mitchell has to show is that he can play in a defense and not just play complete off coverage like he played at Toledo.
Toledo, right?
Which is interesting that they had him running in the slot today a little bit, because sometimes you got to be up on the guys in the slot, and he certainly has the long arms and the ability. So I'd put my money on him, but it's certainly not a given. He has to show that he can do it.
First day back for the Birds at training camp at the NovaCare Complex. Geoff Mosher and the Inside the Birds crew have plenty of coverage over at InsideTheBirds.com. Check out the podcast on all podcasting platforms, and every day right here, Football at 4 on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. All right, Moshe, we will catch up with you on Monday.
Yes, sir. Have a great weekend.
All right, man. Moshe is back Monday, and, of course, Andrew is here tomorrow on the Sports Bash, and you can get all of Andrew's coverage. He has been at training camp for the Inside the Birds crew over at InsideTheBirds.com. I'm Mike Hill. This is the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN, the 97.3 ESPN.